Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this latest edition of Sofa Talks, which has been produced very kindly by the team at WindEurope. I have the pleasure of being a guest moderator and I guess interviewer for the afternoon, and I'm very much looking forward to it. My guest for this afternoon is Gunnar Groebler, who is Senior Vice President and Head of Business Area Wind at Vattenfall. For many of you, and I know there's a lot of you out there, Gunnar really needs no introduction. Without embarrassing you, Gunnar, but having studied, I think it was mechanical engineering all those years ago, you have really risen through the ranks and have been instrumental in some of the key changes within the European wind market, and I think more widely within the renewables market within Europe over recent years. And with that in mind, we really wanted to kind of run a live, unscripted Q&A with questions from you, the audience, throughout, which I will endeavour to work through. So if you've got questions, I know we've had a lot in advance through email and so forth. Please chuck them in the questions panel. It should be live and on your screen now. I can't promise to answer them all, but I will certainly work my way through them. We will try and give you a really good insight into what really is at the forefront of Gunnar's mind at the moment as we, yes, battle through COVID, but also look ahead through the 2020s. So Gunnar, welcome. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
And what part of the world do we find you in at the moment then, Gunnar? Where are you? You're looking very comfortable.
Yeah, well, I'm on my sofa. That's the whole concept, right? It's a sofa talk. So I'm actually I'm in lockdown, so I'm at home on my sofa, all with a coffee here. So exactly as proposed.
Excellent, excellent. Well, as I say, I hope everyone that's listening in has got something to drink too. And as I say, keep your questions coming in. I guess we've really got to start, in terms of the here and now, Gunnar, which is, COVID-19. Perhaps we'll cover Brexit a little bit later. As I said, sort of in the pre-show talk, we've moved from Brexit as an acronym to COVID. I don't know what the D is going to be next, but certainly when we look at the COVID-19 situation within Europe, perhaps you could give us an insight into how that's impacted you personally in a day-to-day role, but also in terms of how that's impacted your operations across Europe too.
Yeah, happy to. I'm just thinking about the D. What is the D acronym? Perhaps it's the deal, the Green Deal that EU is discussing right now. That might be it. But let's stay with the C, with COVID for a second. So of course this is unprecedented times. I don't think anybody has ever sort of gone through what we're going through right now in this respect. So there's nothing that has been tested before, and I think that goes for us individually, but also for us in our business life. So I think how I look upon it are basically three priorities. If I look from a business perspective, first priority is keeping our people safe and in good health. That goes for our people that we have in our own teams, but also people that are working on our behalf, be it in the O&M sector, construction, etc. So keeping them safe and healthy conditions is top priority. Second priority is that we actually deliver the product that we produce, which is electricity. We're to some extent system critical. So making sure that we deliver to society the electricity that they right now actually really need is critical. So that's the second priority. And the third priority, of course, from a company perspective, what needs to be done now to safeguard the company in a crisis modus? What do we have to look at to really also ensure that the company goes through the crisis as good as we can steer it, and perhaps also better out of the crisis than it was before.
And is that the mindset that you're going into in terms of like, how do we use this to kind of actively sort of, I guess, bench test some of those systems and sort of come out as a stronger business? I mean, is that the mindset of the Vattenfall management team?
That's at least how we try to approach it, right? It won't work for all sort of the businesses because some are impacted more than others and differently impacted. But certainly, sort of, it's a crisis, no doubt about that. but also looking at the opportunities that you have in a crisis is I would say, something you should do, and it's certainly the mindset of my team. Yes.
And in practical terms, what does that mean in terms of sort of the daily operations on site? If you take one of your major projects, as it were, what does that mean in practical terms for how those teams on the ground are able to keep it operational? How would you describe that phase? Is it sort of around, are you having to be selective around kind of those operations and maintenance tasks, or are you, how does that play out in practical terms?
In terms of opportunities, you mean? Well,
absolutely.
I think what the crisis does is it sharpens the focus. It sharpens the mind to really focus on what is essential. Yeah. And we see that given that some O&M activities cannot be performed because we don't get the right teams to the right place at the right time, we don't get the supply of material to the right place right now. So the free movement of people and goods is not really where we sort of know it from the past. So people have to get creative around it and really sort of focus on what is really important. What is important to keep the business running, and how can we optimize around that? I think this focusing on what is really essential is, I would say, something that this crisis really sort of fosters.
And you've always been very optimistic about the future of European wind, which has been fantastic to see. We've had 2018 and 19 as an industry throughout Europe were tough years. From an install perspective, they perhaps they had their challenges. 20 isn't shaping up to be, it's shaping up to sort of, present a whole new set of challenges. Does that change your mindset in terms of the growth mindset, I guess, in terms of Vattenfall's own objectives against 2025, which you might want to talk about, but also in terms of kind of what the industry can realistically achieve? Like, how should we as business leaders be thinking about that?
I think there are two dimensions to it. One is the sort of the social, more political dimension to it, and one is what the industry can actually deliver. And yeah. what I at least observe in all the discussions I'm having right now with industry leaders, but also with politicians, with policymakers, is that the whole notion of changing the environment into a renewable environment has not changed. So the whole discussion around the European Green Deal is more lively today than it perhaps has been 4 months ago. So any discussion I'm having around potential recovery plans from national governments or from the EU is centered around the Green Deal and what needs to happen there. If you then translate that into growth for the wind business, just as an example, offshore wind would need to be at 450 gigawatts by 2050. Just to put that in perspective, we're at roughly 20 today. So 20 times what we have installed today should be installed in 2050. And those turbines that are spinning today won't spin in 2050. So we're really sort of talking an extreme growth path. And there's a lot of political and social will to really go down that route. From an industry perspective, yes, of course, we're seeing the impact of COVID-19. Some of the factories have been closed and reopened. So I think all in all, as an industry, we're going through this crisis relatively well, and we can deliver on the ask that policymakers have on us. From a developer's perspective, there are plenty of opportunities to develop. Financing, yes, we certainly see some bumps in the road right now. But ultimately, also there, I don't see from a long-term perspective the difficulties also to finance it. So yes, here and now difficult, but on the long end, fundamentals haven't changed.
Yeah, we're going to sort of dig into those into the financials in just a second. And actually, there's an interesting question coming in sort of in a variety of different means, as it were, through from our attendees. So thank you, attendees. But it's framed around that dilemma whereby, in the short term at least, taking France as an example, we're seeing a demand dip, as it were, as manufacturing obviously reduces significantly, and the pricing is following that. Is that a problem in your eyes as far as PPAs are concerned? And again, we'll talk about the corporate PPAs in a little bit, but how do you balance those two up in terms of the pricing of those PPAs and that demand?
Well, of course, COVID-19 has an impact on demand. No doubt about that. And I think it is also, it's adding to a price development that we have seen over the summer. It has been a relatively warm summer, relatively wet in the Nordics, so prices have been under pressure already prior to COVID. And now with COVID and the demand going down, we see power prices going further down. On the other hand, we also see, if you look at the forward curves, that there's an expectation. This is not an L-shaped scenario where sort of prices remain low, but they will pick up again. And then there's a question whether it's going to be Q4 this year or mid of next year or end of next year. But prices will pick up again. And then if you look at the lifetime of an asset or of a PPA, which is normally asset is 25, 30 years, PPA 10, 15 years. So then you're looking at the first 1.5 to 2 years where it's sort of price setting is a bit more difficult. The tail, though, the longer part of the PPA or the asset lifetime will be sort of then the market expectation that we had pre-COVID. So there will be a certain impact on the PPA market, but I don't expect it to be major. And that's not what I see when talking also to potential off-takers.
I was going to say, so when you are having those discussions, I mean, is it a case of sort of realigning their expectations on that? Or, you know, there was I was on talking to a US developer last week that was talking around the fact that actually there's almost a credit risk associated with the corporate off-taker, as it were, you know, in terms of the future viability of their business. So how does that, is that coming into play? Is it changing the sort of the length of the negotiation, or the kind of the way that you educate that corporate off-taker, particularly when it relates to PPAs?
Well, the discussion I'm having right now are predominantly with people that are used to the PPA market. Yeah. And they are larger corporate players, different industries. So that actually does not really change just due to COVID. Yes, of course, they are looking at credit risk, and we do. But again, I haven't seen this being a major issue in the discussions we're having right now.
Okay, so, that makes sense. Just shifting that then into the sort of into the offshore market, and as we kind of look at the sort of the evolution of that market, I think few would have predicted that particularly the way in which the investment structure of the European offshore market has changed, and the speed at which that would change. I think it was 12-18 months ago that you undertook that first corporate PPA for, it was Kriegers Flak, was that right?
Yeah, Kriegers Flak, yes. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and since then, obviously, we've seen others follow. We've seen Good Energy, Dansk, Google, I think, come in on a series of corporate PPAs. Is that a fixed kind of sort of investment framework now in your mind? Do you think there's sort of limited sort of flexibility and kind of creativity within that area of the market, or can we expect sort of further innovation in the way that corporate off-takers engage with ultimately that heavy area of investment within wind?
I don't think we are at a stage right now where sort of things are fixed and set. Still, PPAs are negotiated more sort of individually, because the demand that the off-taker has and the offer that we as a developer and operator would have are still very different if you talk to different parties. What I experienced, though, is exactly what you say, that the PPA is normally one element of moving into perhaps further cooperation and collaboration. Yeah. Where sort of we as utility help them PPA off-takers to further decarbonize or carbon manage their production, or where we then discuss how we can support them in further reducing their CO2 footprint. I think that's what you see more, where we as utility offering the whole palette of technology are sort of a meaningful party to speak to.
I think memory serves, started talking about that European collaboration element back end of last year, certainly very publicly, particularly from a policy perspective, in terms of the need for the European communities to really work much more closely to kind of drive some of those challenges within offshore wind forwards, not necessarily just within the financial and the investment perspective, but also in terms of early stage development, spatial planning, etc.
Yes.
And I know that there's sort of again, I'm going to get the project wrong, but I know you've sort of had sort of, you've probably experienced some of your own challenges on that within one of the Scandinavian projects, and I'm going to get the name wrong, and you're going to correct me.
Yeah, we had a discussion in Sweden actually, where we had to abandon a project due to military restrictions. So we were too close to an area where military activities were happening from the Swedish forces. So that was then to we wouldn't get the permit through. They would not allow us to build a wind farm there. Yes. So the maritime special planning is a key element. If you talk sort of European cooperation, I think there a lot needs to happen, that we really further coordinate on a European level, and they actually include also the UK, given that UK is still the largest offshore market and an essential part of the North Sea cooperation, at least I would say. So maritime special planning needs to be further coordinated and needs to be strengthened.
How do we make that coordination realistically take place, as it were? You know, developers are notoriously they're a notoriously secretive bunch. You know, how do we kind of create that? What do we do that we're not doing at the moment?
No, I think yes, we of course we are competitors, but on this particular topic, I think the interests are very much aligned. And we had a discussion with Frans Timmermans and the Wind CEOs on Monday, actually, where we brought that forward as a WindEurope ask to the EU government and also to the national governments to further coordinate there. And they were very open to listen and to understand sort of how they can help us. Another forum where this is on the agenda is the North Sea Energy Cooperation, which is also amongst the European countries, and Germany is taking the lead now, where also we have said this needs to be brought up, and State Secretary Feith, who is leading this group, also has this on his agenda. So I think there are already sort of the understanding of this need is growing. And just again, to put it in perspective, 20 gigawatts installed today, 450 by 2050. If we really want to make this work, and if we want to ensure that projects are built where it makes most sense from an economic perspective, from a cost perspective, we need to talk the maritime special planning. Yeah. We have fishermen, we have military, we have trade ships, etc. And we as Wind came relatively late to the party. Yeah. But we need to ensure that sort of this is not to a disadvantage, because if we don't ensure that, the 450 will not happen.
Well, so I guess looking at that, you know, from a sort of the way in which you've championed sort of driving down those costs in offshore wind, really quite consistently over 24 plus months, as it were, and certainly, you know, very publicly. That supply chain element, that element of, you know, picking up on the maritime aspect there, is clearly going to be key in terms of kind of, you know, getting to that top number from where we are at the moment. The discussion last year, and I think it was reflected in the Boskalis results, was around kind of how you manage that and communicate that and manage the expectations of the supply chain. How from your perspective and from Vattenfall's perspective, do you see, you know, how do you see what are the sort of key steps necessary to get the supply chain on board with sort of in the most literal sense perhaps, with that cost reduction, and how do you minimize those anticipated disputes that we're seeing as those margins get squeezed?
First of all, I think the supply chain is on board. It's not that the supply chain is just leaning back and saying, well, you talk cost reduction, we don't. They are very much on board with their sort of levers to further reduce their cost. And without the supply chain, I think we would never have been on the cost side where we are today. So yep. So it's a joint effort, clearly a joint effort, and that's perhaps where also we as an offshore industry also take the next level of maturity, where it's not just a procurement exercise to buy a turbine or buy a piece of cable or what have you, but really sort of getting into a more collaborative approach and jointly trying to optimize around a certain project, around a certain business case, where then both sides need to still have fun also with the contractual setup that you have. This doesn't exclude that also things happen on the way of constructing, where you then have to also sort of talk slightly differently to each other. But as long as you have a common understanding of how you want to cooperate and how do you also want to build this project and make this a success. I think that's yeah, to me this is the prerequisite to really get costs further down.
That makes sense, and there's a couple of questions coming in around you know, your view and assessment on how, again, COVID will impact kind of those new developments coming through sort of through the pipeline. I know you made a statement, or Vattenfall, sorry, made a statement recently the Dutch tender for Hollandsee, was it Hollandsee Noord?
Hollandsee Noord, yes.
Yeah, and I wonder whether you could perhaps talk about, perhaps expand a little bit on that if you can, in terms of that decision, because obviously, you know, we're looking for that kind of further development, and you're citing COVID as a sort of as a blocker there. Is that something whereby do you see a pattern emerging there, or a trend in terms of as where other developers might follow suit, or is that exclusive to the Dutch market?
No, I think it was at least our decision were exclusive to that specific project at that specific time. Yeah. And in the context of our own portfolio. And so that was sort of, there's by no means a decision on strategy, by no means a decision on a specific country. It was sort of just for us the coincidence to look at our own situation, that specific project in the context of our portfolio, and that's why we had to take a decision. And why did that become public? Because others might have similar discussions. It's exactly because we are in very intense cooperation with suppliers. So once we took the decision, we wanted to inform our suppliers first that this is how we view the project, and that we sort of will not further work on it. Hence, also the cooperation work we had together will also end here for that specific project. And yes. That's also why it became public that we sort of had that thought. Others might have it as well. I hope for the Dutch for the Dutch authorities and for the market that the Netherlands will see good bids on Hollandse Kust Noord, so that this project will be built. I think it will be good for the Netherlands and good for the industry that it's going to be built. We will focus on Hollandse Kust South, which is 1.5 gigawatts where we moved to the final investment decision this year. So I think we have our plate full also in the Netherlands going forward. No worries.
Yeah, how low do you think that that new tender is going to go in pricing, given that you've set the bar pretty competitively on your own?
The way it's set up, it's going to be an unsubsidized merchant project, right? So it's then the assessment on qualitative criteria. It's a beauty contest. So I think that is already set.
Okay. One final question on the offshore market before we move on that, and it's taken from the floor here. So thank you, whoever submitted this one. But in the context of growing offshore installed capacity and sort of that vision of where we've got to get to, what are the sort of the 3 steps necessary within those existing O&M strategies that have got to take place in order to get there and drive that down? What we've seen is we've seen a set of strategies kind of get us to this point. What needs to fundamentally change in those, or perhaps needs to be reviewed to sort of rocket us?
Well, I think first element is we cannot sort of just lean back on the cost side. We will have to further work on the cost reduction. Yeah. And I see the industry doing this, and one of the major steps you see there is also new technology being implemented, most visibly on the turbine side, where we now move into double-digit megawatt installed per turbine. And this trend will continue and will bring down costs both on the capex but also on the opex. So I think that's one of the trends that you will continue to see, and clearly necessary. Secondly, I think we're getting more and more comfortable with the technology. And also financiers get more and more comfortable with the industry as such. So financing opportunities, we're going to see perhaps different financing structures, different financial players moving into that space as they get more comfortable also with the risk profile of offshore wind. And thirdly, it's back to regulatory framework. I think perhaps one step back on the financing. What will be important and it's great to see that some of the European markets clearly move in that direction, is that you provide the utility with a somewhat foreseeable revenue framework, and that is predominantly in today's market the contract for difference. And I think UK started with that. France has adopted it. Even Denmark, who was very early on the competitive bidding, now moves into a CFD structure. Poland is moving in that direction. So we see more and more countries moving into that contracts for difference, which actually brings the cost of financing further down, and it adds a cost competitive element to the project, because the revenue stream is somewhat stabilized, and you're not that much market exposed. And now it's up to other markets to follow, looking at Germany and also looking at the Netherlands.
And
so that's on the funding front.
Yeah, sorry, you mentioned. Go on.
You go.
No, I was going to say, I couldn't resist. You mentioned Poland. You mentioned the Polish market, and you've talked about it before. Is your, bear in mind that sort of within the offshore market, it's classed as an emerging market, I suppose. Does the current scenario sort of change your time frame or view on that Polish market?
No. Again, there's fundamentally nothing is really changing. The need is there. The need for the Polish government to review their supply mix is there, and Poland, the Polish government has been very consistent on their willingness to deploy offshore wind in Poland and support the Polish supply chain for offshore wind. So I don't foresee a change in the timeline there. I think if you look at the emerging market, most probably one of the most exciting markets that we have in Europe right now.
Interesting.
Talking 8 gigawatts until 2030. That's quite something.
Do you see the Polish market as more exciting than sort of bringing in new technology such as floating wind into the European markets?
I don't think we can do one without the other. I think we're going to see bottom fixed, and some of the areas are just bottom fixed, are just fit for bottom fixed. But we can multiply the area where we can deploy offshore wind by also moving into floating. Again, relatively early days. Also there, we have to go down the cost curve, and we have to learn the technology.
Yeah.
But it's gonna happen. I'm pretty convinced.
When are we going to start seeing the first project at scale?
First half of this decade.
Okay. I'm conscious that offshore is just one area, and we've got questions coming in from everywhere. So I'm going to resist. I think you and I could talk about offshore for a long time, and I'm going to move on. I guess picking up kind of the new technology theme and the sort of the integration concept. Sort of last year with great fanfare, you announced a 60 megawatt Dutch project, Harling Flats.
Harling Fleet, yes. Mm-hmm.
And again, I know that's if memory serves, that's a combination. That's the sort of the trio, isn't it, of the ultimate trio of wind, solar, and storage. Can you give us an update on where that project is? I guess first of all.
Yeah, I'm happy to. And it's one of my favorite ones, I have to admit, in the portfolio right now. Given that it's the first time that we at least sort of have this triplet of onshore wind, solar, and batteries. So it's 22 megawatt onshore, it's 38 megawatt solar, and a 60 megawatt hour battery, all in one site. And the first time that we really optimized then this whole complex against the market, which is very exciting. So where we stand right now, we have all the turbines erected, even in COVID times, on time. So great accomplishment by the team there. We're now doing the balance of plant work for the solar side, and then if we get the workers from East Europe and then back into the Netherlands, we're going to start mounting solar panels at the beginning of May. And in parallel, we're going to ramp up the battery. So end of this year, we want to be operational with that project.
On the battery side of that project, and I'm sure, is there an off-taker confirmed for that project yet that's public? I don't think there is. Is there?
No. We're gonna optimize it against the market.
Okay, gotcha. So how critical is the storage element to that project? I mean, feasibly, you could have said, what, we've got enough on our hands, integrating the wind and solar element. Why add that third element? Because
it was part of the permit. So that's the interesting thing, perhaps. That's sort of also from a governmental perspective, they see the need to work into more hybrid projects. So it was part of the permitting discussion that we had there.
Okay, and do you see this project as part of a sort of, you know, where does this sit in your kind of your strategic kind of, you know, focus, as it were, for the future? Is this a start of something where we're going to sort of see it being rolled out sort of much more consistently in other European markets, or is it much more opportunistic?
Now, for me, it is not opportunistic. First of all, I think we still need to learn a lot how to run such a site and really sort of optimize it. So that's clearly on us now. But if you look at two elements, one is such a hybrid plant brings your cost further down because you utilize the grid connection in a different way, much more efficient. And you can also sort of optimize with a different load pattern against the market. Because wind and solar actually normally, at least not these days, by the way, whereas it's windy and sunny, normally they add up, they match quite nicely the feed-in profiles. But I think one more element to that is that with the whole discussion we're having on onshore, especially, is local acceptance. And through such a hybrid plant, you can actually utilize the plot of land that you're having in a much better way, and that should, at least, and that's the initial feedback we also get in our improve the acceptance around in the communities around.
And what was the size of the battery of the storage on that project? Sorry, just for
60 megawatt hours.
Yeah.
So it's relatively small in relation to the overall installed capacity. But it is, again, for us to find out what the optimal size is to really then play against the electricity market.
And are you seeing enough sort of policy frameworks being rolled out sort of within the EU community for further projects, or was it sort of, you know, where does that, was this really a kind of a stick in the neck out from the sort of the Dutch from a sort of policy perspective? Are there other projects?
I think they were first with that. We see interest from other countries to go down that route, but I have not been involved in anything that has been as concrete as the Haring fleet is.
Okay.
Yeah.
Just sort of a question again from the floor on this, in terms of how I guess both sort of develop, you know, utilities and trade associations can kind of help keep the pressure on at a sort of an EU and a national level to kind of push that agenda forwards, as it were, particularly when at the moment their focus is very definitely, you know, sort of being pulled in a number of different ways. What do we need to, what are the sort of what's the one thing that I guess WindEurope members can be doing to help support and drive that agenda, and kind of, you know, and make sure that you know, that sort of push for hybrid technology and sort of policy frameworks is being driven? You know, how can we all help to get there on that?
Well, I think that what I would say, first of all, it's working as we prove as we speak. Secondly, it's an optimized use of the plot of land. It's community benefits. It's more community benefits, and it further drives down cost. I think that to me is one of the key arguments. You know, where in countries where we still have sort of support schemes, this can help to further drive down the levelized energy cost, and hence reduce the bill of the customer.
Gotcha. And you know, from Vattenfall's perspective, and again, question from the floor on this one, but when we look at kind of how you're able to kind of use that sort of that financial muscle, as it were, to kind of really sort of pull that agenda forwards, particularly with more sort of innovative projects like that, to what extent do you think Vattenfall can continue to sort of acquire a debt against future projects? Bear in mind that kind of very delicate ratio, as it were, against sort of, you know, debt versus finance, as it were. Like, what's your take on this? Like, how do you think that ratio? Are you comfortable with the current ratio of debt against projects, and how do you think that will change, as it were, during this next phase of development?
So if I get you right, sort of our own approach on sort of how we deal with our own projects and the balance sheet.
The debt financing ratio, absolutely.
Yeah. Well, as you know, sort of we have been very focused on not having project financing on our projects and not having too many partners on our projects. which I think was exactly the right thing to do in a phase where sort of we have grown 2015 to 2020, doubled roughly from 2 to 4 gigawatts installed capacity.
Yeah.
As we now want to grow even quicker and sort of not on a linear curve, but rather exponential, we most probably get to limits when it comes to our own balance sheet and what we want to put on our balance sheet. But rather than look for partners to join on specific projects. So that is, I think, something you can expect from Vattenfall, that we will be more open for partners, equity partners in our projects, especially the larger ones that we want to pursue.
What's the time frame around that, Gunnar? I suppose you've got to find the right partner.
No, but of course we have already pursued partnership, right? We have an offshore wind farm in the north of UK, Ormond, where we have invited Swedish insurance money into it. So we're monitoring the market. We have a couple of discussions ongoing with people that would like to invest, and then let's see how sort of this all plays out. It's I think an ongoing process.
I think that's fair. And I guess when we kind of look at that kind of ongoing process and we look at 2020, we've seen some consolidation within the market already, both at a manufacturer level and sort of, through the supply chain. How do you think that picture is going to change? Are we going to see that accelerate, a consolidation? And I guess the sort of second part of that is, do you see that as a good or a bad thing? Like, how comfortable are you with any potential increase?
Well, yes, we have seen some companies in the supply chain disappearing, whether you want to call it consolidation or just maturing of an industry. I think if you take the automotive industry in the early 1900s, we had, I think, many brands that were out there and people that were sort of building cars. And if you look at it today, well, it's a handful of car manufacturers that we have in Europe and perhaps 10 globally. So there has been in this sense, a consolidation. To me, it's also maturity of an industry that sort of some companies are sort of developing in the right direction, and some are perhaps either not fast enough or set different priorities. I think that's what we see. Looking at the supply chain today, I'm actually relatively pleased with the offer that we have. Look at turbines. We had for many years 2 main players. Now we have the third one re-entering the scene with competitive technology. We see also on the foundation side, sort of there are still quite a few out there, and with the growth that we envisage, I think we're going to see also more companies that move into that space. So I'm not worried when it comes to supply chain. There are pockets where sort of I would love to see more, but that will develop over time.
And where do you see the UK's role within offshore and within that kind of picture that you've just painted, particularly in this kind of post, remember the phrase, Brexit era?
Well, also here, fundamentally, Brexit will not change the demand for in the UK for renewables and for offshore wind. I think UK has been very strict and very sort of forward-leaning when it comes to changing the supply mix of electricity, and that will remain. And UK has a clear agenda together with the offshore industry to promote local content, and I think we have seen local content requirements, and we as an industry, I think, do good to comply with that. And if you look at the projects being built right now, I think there is a lot of local content that is either being built up in order to supply those projects, and then also future projects, or that is already there, and then that is used for such projects. So fundamentally, offshore wind will continue to grow in the UK, and from a supply chain also, I think we're going to see more local content coming from UK.
And does that mean, sort of in the sort of the case of an unsuccessful CFD bid, that that means that, you know, the sort of the confidence there is worthwhile exploring sort of other, you know, the merchant route, or sort of another funding option. Like where does that put the investment strategy?
First of all, a CFD is an auction, so you win or you don't. If you don't win, you can sort of try again next time. Yeah? You have the auction in 21, and then there's another one in 23. So of course, no one can be sure, absolutely sure, that we're gonna win a CFD. So everybody has to plan also with a plan B to re-enter in 23, or go down the merchant route if your own views on electricity prices actually support that, or you have a PPA, a counterparty that would be willing to enter into the PPA, that then sort of would help you to build that project on a non-CFD basis. Yeah.
And do you think there's enough competition, there's enough tension in that kind of PPA market to get to make sure the pricing is right? Well,
it is at least a growing market. That's what I see. It's a growing market. It will be good for, what is it, 10, 15, 20% of the overall market. We shouldn't forget that we as end consumers, for the electricity that we use for the lamp and what have you, will not be sourced through a PPA. So it's predominantly industry, and industry that has a good forecast on their electricity consumption, and where electricity is also a major part of their cost base. But certainly we have not come to the end of that, or a saturation of that market.
And I'm conscious of time on this, and I know we've sort of got a number of different areas that we've sort of touched on this, but I think just looking across the European space, Gunnar, at the moment, you know, and you know, I guess, you know, in particular, kind of looking at it from your perspective, where, you know, you've got that sort of that view from Vattenfall, but, you know, also the sort of the view from you know, from your position at WindEurope too. How can we help sort of wind industry leaders, you know, running firms throughout the sort of the supply chain and through the development space, through, you know, all areas of the market? How can we help them make sure that they're doing what they need to do right now to protect their own businesses? What's your view? What's your kind of, if there was to be one takeaway that they took from this in terms of how they really kind of look after their own and protect their own business, based on your experience, where should they be focused?
Now, the policymakers, who from which perspective should I? From
the wind business leaders, so from those working on the front line, day in, day out. You know, yes, they'll work within different policy frameworks, etc., but it's the companies on the ground that are, you know, they're looking at those payrolls each month, they're looking at the cost, they're looking at, you know, what should they be doing now to protect their business?
I think, as I said before, it's about focus. It's about sort of also perhaps making tough decisions on what you continue, what you discontinue. I think, given that this industry is still in a maturing phase, we might have still things in our own lab that, if you really think about it, we don't really need, perhaps, especially right now. And then you focus and perhaps stop or delay certain activities that you have. What I would not advise to do is to delay the development of projects and the development of technology, because with the firm view that EU has on the Green Deal, we're going to see the projects coming. I firmly believe we're going to see the growth opportunities, and then we as utilities should be there to grasp those. And that means continue the development of existing projects, continue the interaction with the supply chain, give supply chain also visibility on your pipeline, to give them comfort to for themselves also invest into technology development. I think that's important.
So to be clear, when it comes to the Green Deal, this is you know, it's how we turn this current situation to our advantage to drive that agenda for the Green Deal, is it?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Gunnar, I'm conscious of time. I'm very conscious of time, and you know, the sort of I could keep asking you questions for a long time, but I realize you've got places to go to. So I guess maybe we'll end on this, which is some may or may not be aware that one of the one of the curious inventions, I think, maybe that came out of Vattenfall years ago was the invention of the seatbelt, if I'm right in thinking. Is that correct?
That's true. That's a long time ago. Yeah. We had a lot of accidents in the north of Sweden, and that's when Vattenfall engineers actually invented the seatbelt. Yes.
Okay.
Long time ago.
So it's got curious sort of the sort of the parallels back into the motor industry, particularly on consolidation earlier. Kind of, you make you think. And I'm into my cars, so I will freely admit that I'm aware of that. What in terms of a legacy, that's a really interesting one. Where do you see that from a personal perspective in terms of what is your personal, if we spin forwards, and I don't want to be shuffling you off too forwards, as it were, too quickly, but where do you see, how would you like to be remembered in this market? How would you like that legacy to be reflected?
Well, I think that question is much more difficult than inventing a seatbelt. But I'm in a very, very lucky position personally to work in an industry and to contribute to something that I truly believe in.
Yeah.
That is fun, and for a technician, for an engineer like me, developing wind farms and solar farms and see the turbines spinning and electricity coming out of it is just great. Being part of that and being able to be part of a major transformation in our society towards a renewable environment is just great. And if my legacy is to contribute to that and perhaps be responsible for one or two decisions in that whole transformation, I think that's more than enough. I'm very happy. I'm very sort of honored to be where I am, and when I can contribute to that, I think that's great. That's just cool. It's really cool.
It's a good answer, and I said it was the last question, but I'm going to ask one more, which is again just perhaps a little lighter, lighter note to end on. I know we've gone through some sort of fairly significant areas. There's a very famous radio show that's, I think, it's been going for 60+ years in the UK, which is called Desert Island Discs. And on that show, they ask the guest what 6 or 7 tracks they would take with them to a desert island, as it were, and which one they would save. But they also ask a question about a luxury, and they say, when you're on that desert island, what is that one luxury that you couldn't do without? Now, in many respects, a lot of us feel like we're on a desert island at the moment. We're kind of, holed up in a back room or, plowing away, certainly on our own. What is your lockdown luxury, of the moment? What is that thing that at the moment you just couldn't do without?
Well, we talked earlier about it, that we're in a lucky position to have a garden right now, and I spend a lot of time right now in the garden. But if I would have to pick one thing right now, I would take the basketball basket that we have that my oldest son got last year, and being able there to shoot some balls together with him, which I haven't done since I basically started study. I did play basketball during my school time, but then had to stop due to my knees. But now being able to shoot a couple of balls with him, that is big fun. That is it's relaxing. I realize I switch off there, and that's perhaps what I would take with me. But then I also have to take my son with me. I want that's for another story.
Yeah, absolutely. Gunnar, we're out of time, so thank you very much indeed for joining us today, and thank you attendees for all your questions. I'm sure we couldn't get through all of them, but I understand from WindEurope this recording will be made available, and if you've got specific questions you'd like to put to Gunnar, then you can contact me direct, either via LinkedIn or indeed your WindEurope representative. My name's been Adam Barber, Managing Director at Tamarindo Group. Gunnar, thank you very much for joining me today. And
it was a pleasure. Thank you for having me.
I look forward to catching up soon. Cheers.
Thank you. Cheers.